The hand came first, before the voice, before the footsteps, before any part of Zara Osei's mind caught up with what was happening in that grocery aisle. The hand came. Cold fingers, slow and deliberate, closing around the back of her neck like a brand that had never fully healed. Not squeezing, just sitting there, just reminding. The way you'd grip a stray dog you once owned and decided you still had rights to, regardless of what any piece of paper said.
I felt it and my whole body just stopped. Not the freeze where you're calculating your next move. The other kind. The deep muscle, full system kind where your nervous system remembers something your brain spent 3 years in therapy trying to pave over and plant flowers on. My chest got tight. Not anxiety tight, dread tight. The specific compression of a person who knows, at a cellular level, that the thing they were most afraid of just stepped into the same aisle. My vision went thin at the edges. I could smell the detergent section, lavender and synthetic pine, and something underneath it that smelled like cleaning products trying too hard. And I remember thinking of all the things to notice right now. Why is it that? Some people carry pepper spray. Some carry trauma therapy, a support group on speed dial, and a safety plan laminated inside their phone case. Me? I carry survival instincts that fire off before I even finish processing what I'm surviving. That's what 2 years inside a relationship with Darius Beaumont does to a person. It doesn't just leave marks. It rewires the whole architecture of how you move through a room, how you catalog exits, how you track the position of a threat, even when you're pretending to read a cereal label. Your body becomes a security system that never, ever fully deactivates. Nico felt it before she moved. Her son, 7 years old enough to read most things, too young to be fluent in this particular language, had been walking beside her with a bag of Rice Crisps under one arm and a running internal debate about gummy bear color ratios going on at full volume. A normal Tuesday, a nothing afternoon, the kind of afternoon that is supposed to be forgettable. And then his voice just cut off mid-sentence, like someone had reached inside him and turned a dial. Not distracted quiet, not tired quiet. The specific quiet of a child who learned early that some silences were warnings. He pressed himself against the back of Zara's leg. His fingers found the hem of her jacket and gripped it.
Hi viewers, I want to ask you something personal before we go any further. Have you or someone you love ever felt that kind of fear? The kind that lives in the body and not the mind? The kind that shows up before you even have a name for what you're afraid of? Drop your answer in the comments right now, because what happens next in this story is going to hit very differently depending on your answer. Zara turned slowly. That was important. The slowness. She had learned a long time ago that fast movements changed the energy in a room when Darius was in it, and old training dies harder than you'd want it to. Darius Beaumont stood 2 feet behind her in the middle of the Kroger cereal aisle on Madison Avenue, looking like a man who had never once been the problem. He wore a pressed cream shirt, dark slacks, the kind of leather shoes that made a specific sound on tile floors that she had once been conditioned to hear from across an apartment and immediately adjust her posture. He was smiling. Not the real smile. She had only seen that one a handful of times and mostly in the first 4 months before the pattern showed itself. This was the other one, the public-facing one. Warm and practiced and assembled for the benefit of anyone nearby who might be watching. Threatening to her and charming to everyone else at the exact same time, with no transition between the two. Zara. His voice came out like warm water. Easy. Relaxed. Like they ran into each other every Tuesday and this was just the latest installment. It's been a minute. She said nothing. Her hand found Nico's without looking down. I just want to talk, he said, and he was already stepping closer, closing the gap between them with the smooth, unhurried confidence of a man who had never once been told no and believed it. Privately, 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Privately. That word landed in her chest like a stone in still water. She had a whole history with that word. Privately meant no witnesses. Privately meant no record. Privately meant whatever came next stayed between them, and between them meant it stayed with her. There's nothing to talk about, she said. Her voice came out flatter than she'd rehearsed it in her head. Steadier, actually. That surprised her. Darius tilted his head. That small, patient, utterly calculated tilt that she knew preceded the shift from polished to something that polished was covering. His eyes moved down to Nico, stayed there a beat too long. And then the smile widened in a way that didn't reach anything real. "He looks just like me," he said. Nico buried his face in the back of her jacket. Darius stepped forward, measured, certain, and his hand, the same hand that had never once bruised her in any way a camera could catch, the same hand a family court judge had never seen do a single documented wrong thing, moved toward her wrist and closed around it. Not hard enough to hurt, just hard enough to make its point. Just hard enough to remind her exactly who she used to be inside a room alone with him. Somewhere behind him, a shopping cart stopped rolling. And the silence that followed, it was a very different kind of silence than the store had been making before. The thing about the kind of damage Darius Beaumont did was that it didn't leave anything you could photograph, measure, or present on page 3 of a legal filing. No split lip. No bruising along the forearms. Nothing a nurse could note in a chart under visible trauma, or a responding officer could write down in a report that would hold up in any room that required evidence. What Darius left behind was the other kind of damage. The interior kind, the kind that colonizes the way a person hears their own name, the way they react to a raised voice in the wrong tone of a parking garage, the way they check the locks twice and then a third time not because they forgot but because the anxiety needs to hear the click again before it quiets down.
I used to make the excuses for it before I even knew I was making them. That part I'm not proud of, but I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen because pretending is what kept me there longer than I should have stayed. I told myself he was stressed, told myself his work pressure was real and his frustration was understandable, and that I had said the wrong thing at the wrong time, which was why the temperature in whatever room we occupied had dropped 20 degrees. He never needed to raise a hand. He had other tools. He decided what I ate. He tracked which friends I talked to and for how long. He gave me $40 a week and called it an allowance, and if I asked for more, he called it irresponsible. He called all of it protection. He said it with genuine conviction, which is the most dangerous kind of lie, the kind the person telling it actually believes. The night I left, he didn't stop me. That's the part that used to confuse me most. He just stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, watching me load the car with Nico asleep on my shoulder and one bag of what I could grab in the time I had. And he said, very calmly, very evenly, "You'll be back." And the worst part of that sentence, the part that kept me awake in my sister's spare room for the next 6 months, wasn't that he said it. It was how long I spent afterward wondering if he was right. In the Kroger aisle, with his hand on her wrist and Nico pressed against her back, Zara felt the disconnection begin. It happened the way it always used to happen inside the apartment, gradual and quiet, like the tide going out without announcement. The fluorescent lights above her got too bright, the kind of bright that flattens depth and makes everything look slightly unreal. The refrigerator hum at the far end of the aisle became the only sound her ears wanted to track. Her body remained standing in the correct coordinates. Her mind floated exactly 2 feet to the left of it and watched from a distance that felt both protective and terrifying. She knew the clinical term for it now: dissociation. She had learned it in her 3rd therapy session with Dr. Anaya Thorne, who had explained it the way good therapists explain things, without making it sound like a flaw. Your nervous system is doing exactly what it was trained to do. It's protecting you. The problem isn't the mechanism. The problem is what trained it.
During the relationship, she hadn't known the word. She had called it going away. She had told herself it was just how she handled stress. Darius was speaking. She caught the sounds of it more than the meaning. Something about the custody arrangement being unnecessarily difficult. Something about Nico deserving consistency. Something about how she always made simple things complicated because she was too emotional to see clearly. And he said this without a raised voice, without any visible frustration. The way you'd explain to a child why they couldn't have something they wanted. Patient, rational, completely in control of the frame of the conversation. That was the skill she had never fully appreciated while she was inside it. Darius did not need to shout. He had never been a shouter. He was a reframer. A man who could take any situation, including one in which he was the source of the problem, and present it back to you from an angle where you were the one who needed to adjust. Around them, people had noticed. 3, maybe 4. A woman near the paper towels who kept glancing over but kept her body angled away. A teenager with earbuds in one ear who had slowed his cart and was watching with the specific expression of someone deciding whether this was their business. A man at the far end of the aisle who had simply stopped moving entirely and was staring at the floor like he was waiting for the floor to give him instructions. Nobody stepped forward. Nobody said a word. And Zara understood this too. She had been a bystander once herself years ago, before she had any first-hand knowledge of what these moments looked like from the inside. She had stood in a parking lot watching something that did not look quite right and told herself it wasn't her place. She understood it. She still couldn't forgive it. Nico started crying. Not the loud, demanding cry of a child who wants something. The small, soundless, shoulder-shaking cry of a child who is trying very hard not to cry at all. His fingers twisted deeper into the hem of her jacket. She felt it through the fabric. She felt it in her chest. That sound. That specific sound reached straight through the dissociation and grabbed her by the sternum and pulled. The room came back. Full volume, full weight, full clarity. The fluorescent lights stopped being too bright. The refrigerator hum dropped back into background. And standing in the full return of her own presence, Zara felt something shift in her body that was not fear. It was older than fear, harder than fear. She opened her mouth, and Darius leaned in close enough that his words only traveled the distance between them. Very quiet, precise, for her alone. You still belong to me. The temperature in the aisle seemed to drop and settle. Zara did not move. She was running a calculation she had no name for: distance, weight, witness count, the mathematics of whether this moment was going to become something she could not walk Nico away from. She was still running it when the voice came from directly behind Darius. It was not loud. It required no volume to carry the weight it carried. Let go. Now. Darius did not let go. But he turned. And the moment he turned, the aisle shifted in a way that had nothing to do with anything physical. Cashin Vire didn't announce himself. That was the first thing Zara noticed, not his face, not his height, not the particular way he occupied space. The first thing was the absence of performance. He hadn't arrived with urgency. He hadn't squared up or planted his feet or done any of the physical theater that men used when they wanted to signal they were about to do something. He was simply there, at the edge of the aisle, one hand resting on the handle of a shopping cart, looking at Darius with the calm, assessing attention of someone who had already decided how this ended. He appeared, from every outward indication, to be mildly inconvenienced by the interruption to his grocery shopping. He was tall, not overwhelmingly, but the kind of tall that a room notices before the person inside it introduces themselves. Dark complexion, jaw set easy, eyes that were doing considerably more work than anything else on his face. He wore a charcoal vest over a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow. No tie, no badge. Nothing that explained why the air in the aisle had changed the moment he stopped walking. He set his cart carefully against the shelf to his right. And then, without looking away from Darius, he reached to his right hand and began removing his rings. One at a time, methodical. He set them on the cart's child seat with the patience of a man who has done this before and who understands the value of not damaging things that matter to him. The ring removal was the sentence he didn't say out loud. The stock clerk at the far end of the aisle set down his inventory box and walked away. The woman near the paper towels took 3 slow steps back. The teenager with the earbud put both hands on his cart and steered it quietly around the corner without making eye contact with anyone. Nobody was asked to leave. Nobody was told anything. They left because they understood, at the level where information doesn't require words, that a certain kind of man had entered the space and that the geometry of the situation had rearranged itself accordingly. Darius had not released Zara's wrist, but his grip had loosened without his appearing to notice it had. He looked at Cashin with the studied coolness of a man who needed to appear unbothered more than he actually was. He swept his gaze from Cashin's face down to the rings on the cart and then back up again, processing, calculating, deciding what kind of opposition this was and whether his usual approach applied. I don't know you, Darius said. You don't need to, Cashin said. This is a private matter. It stopped being private, Cashin said, and his voice had the flat, factual quality of a man reading a weather report. The moment your hand touched her in a public space, Darius let out a short laugh. Controlled, dismissive, the laugh of a man who had used social confidence as a weapon for long enough that it had become reflexive. He released Zara's wrist, slowly, as if it had been his choice all along. You want to make this your situation? Darius said. It already is. Cashin shifted his weight, almost imperceptibly. You want to discuss what else is already yours. There is a complaint sitting with the State Bar, flagged under your employer's registered name. Commercial lease documentation, falsified, 19 months old, has been sitting in a drawer. Could stay there. The laugh stopped, not the way laughter fades, the way a power source cuts. Immediate, total, leaving a specific kind of silence behind it. Darius's face did not break. He was too disciplined for a full break. But something behind his eyes moved, a micro-recalibration, a fast and private reassessment, and whatever number that calculation had come up with was not the number he'd walked into the aisle with. He let go of the air he'd been holding. Zara pulled her arm back, slowly, deliberately, the way you remove yourself from something that might still startle if you move too fast. Darius straightened his shirt, smoothed the front of it with both palms. A gesture so routine it must have been unconscious. He looked at Zara once. The look was long and flat and entirely composed, and she recognized it the way you recognize a sound you heard once in a bad dream and never forgot. It wasn't rage. Rage was reactive. This was something colder than rage. Premeditated, patient, a decision being made, not a feeling being expressed. He walked past Cashin without another word. His footsteps were even, unhurried. Each step the footstep of a man who needed the room to understand that he was leaving by choice. At the corner of the aisle he stopped. A half-second pause, without turning. Then he rounded the corner and was gone. The aisle exhaled. Cashin picked his rings up from the cart's child seat. He didn't rush it. He slid each one back into place on his fingers without looking at them, the way people handle things they've worn long enough that their hands know the sequence. Then he looked at Nico. The boy was still pressed into Zara's side. His face was blotchy. His eyes were doing the swollen, careful work of someone who had recently been crying and was currently deciding if it was safe to stop. Cashin crouched down just slightly, not all the way, not in the exaggerated way adults do when they want children to know they are making an effort, just enough to bring his face closer to level. His voice dropped one register. You good, little man? Nico didn't answer. But his shoulders dropped a fraction, and he didn't cry again. Cashin stood. He looked at Zara. His eyes were direct in a way that asked for nothing, expected nothing, and offered the specific kind of steadiness that isn't warmth but is something equally necessary. You don't owe me anything, he said. I'm going to go finish my shopping. He turned the cart back down the aisle. Just like that. As if he hadn't just walked into the worst moment of someone else's Tuesday and changed the structural integrity of it with a sentence and 3 rings on a cart seat. Zara watched him go. She didn't have his name, didn't have an explanation for how he'd known what he'd known about Darius, or what that legal exposure meant, or who he was to any of this. She had none of it. What she had was the memory of Darius's face at the corner of that aisle. That last look. That measured, patient, entirely unafraid look that was not the look of a man who had been stopped. It was the look of a man who was already planning what came next. For 23 days, nothing happened. And in Zara Osei's life, 23 days of nothing happening was the loudest warning she had ever received. She knew the rhythm. Anyone who had ever lived inside a cycle of controlled chaos knew it. The press and release, the storm and the uncanny stillness that followed it. She had sat in enough therapy sessions, read enough literature, and had enough 2 a.m. conversations with her sister Tamika to know that the calm was not the end. The calm was the inhale before the next sentence. But she was also running on 3 years of empty, 3 years of single parenting and court dates and mandatory mediation sessions and legal fees that had been quietly dismantling her savings the way termites dismantle a floor, invisible until the moment your foot goes through it. And when quiet finally arrived, even the part of her brain that knew better was desperate enough for rest that it took the deal. So she breathed. She let herself have 23 days. She went back to the morning workout class at the Y that she had stopped attending when the court schedule made early mornings impossible. She reorganized the kitchen for the first time since she'd moved in. She took Nico to the Natural History Museum on a Saturday and watched him stand in front of the blue whale model with his neck craned back and his mouth open, and she laughed, a real laugh from the part of her chest that hadn't been tight, for the first time in longer than she could specifically remember. During those 23 days, Darius complied. Every single term of the custody arrangement, executed with the kind of clean, punctual, documented precision that would have looked exemplary in a court review. He returned Nico on time, not late, not barely on time, but 5 minutes early, which was its own kind of message. He responded to co-parenting messages within the hour. He flagged schedule questions through the proper channels. He was, suddenly and without any visible transition, the cooperative and communicative co-parent that 3 different family court judges had spent 18 months asking him to be and documenting that he was not. Too compliant, too clean, too consistent. Zara noticed it. She brought it up with Britta Ashford, her attorney, who listened carefully and said, in the blunt, efficient way Britta said everything. Documented compliance is its own kind of legal strategy. Keep noting it, keep dating it, and don't mistake it for character change. Zara kept noting it. She told herself she wasn't being paranoid. She told herself she had learned, finally, the difference between caution and fear, and that what she was doing was caution. She told herself this approximately twice a day for 23 days. On the 24th day, the legal envelope arrived. It was slim, cream-colored, the kind of official envelope that doesn't explain itself on the outside. She opened it at the kitchen counter while Nico was in the next room building something with Lego bricks, giving a detailed running commentary to no one visible about structural load-bearing challenges and the aerodynamics of his emerging spacecraft. His voice was bright and certain and completely absorbed. She read the document, set it down, picked it up, read it again. Then her legs made a very quiet, very private decision, and she sat on the kitchen floor. Emergency petition for custody modification. Filed 3 days prior. Applicant, Darius Beaumont. She kept reading. The language was calibrated, assembled by someone who understood exactly which words activated which responses in family court systems. Emotional dysregulation. Unstable home environment. Documented pattern of anxiety-driven decision-making placing the minor child at ongoing psychological risk. Documented. He had used that word, as if there were documents. As if the Kroger in his hands had become a document. From the next room, Mom, I need more blue. Where's the blue pieces? Zara folded the petition with the care of someone handling something she didn't want to touch. She stood. She smoothed her shirt. By the window, baby. In the red bin. Her voice was steady. She had worked hard for that steadiness. She had paid a therapist and lost sleep and white-knuckled through bad days to build that steadiness. And right now she was grateful for every bit of it because if Nico heard anything in her voice that was not steady, he would carry it. She put the petition on the top closet shelf. Then she sat back down at the kitchen table and opened her laptop and began running the numbers that she had been trying not to run. Attorney retainer for the emergency track. Lost work hours. The psychological evaluation fee that the petition would trigger. The transportation costs for the additional court dates. The way her freelance income had already been running thin because the custody schedule made consistent client commitments structurally difficult. She ran the numbers 3 times, hoping the result would change. Didn't. For 6 days she kept moving. Showed up. Did the work. Fed him. Helped with homework. Kept the schedule clean. Kept her face composed. Britta filed the response. The evaluation was scheduled. Zara answered the preliminary intake forms with the careful precision of a person who understood that her words on those pages would be read by a stranger who had not met her and would be forming conclusions based on how she described herself under pressure. On the 7th day, a second envelope arrived. thicker than the first. No return address she recognized. Inside, a tabbed, indexed folder of documents she had not asked for, compiled by a person she had not spoken to since a Tuesday afternoon in a grocery aisle. Cashin Veyer's name was not on the cover. It didn't need to be. She sat at the kitchen table under the good overhead light and opened the first tab. Then the second. Her eyes moved faster. Her breathing slowed in the way that happens when the mind is working too hard to spare resources for the body. By the time she reached the last page, Nico had long since fallen asleep. She sat alone in her quiet kitchen and understood, for the first time since the petition arrived, that she was not as alone in this as she had believed. What she didn't yet understand was what that was going to cost her. The financial pressure landed first, the way it always did. Not all at once, but in measured, sequential increments, like someone who understood exactly how much weight a structure could take before each new addition became the one that broke it. Britta Ashford called on a Tuesday morning and walked Zara through the practical reality of the emergency petition in the direct, no-cushion way that made Britta the right attorney for this situation even when it made her the exhausting one. Emergency track meant compressed timelines. Compressed timelines meant accelerated billing. The psychological evaluation ordered for both parents would run separate from the legal fees. The guardian ad litem, who would be appointed to represent Nico's interests independently, added another layer of costs that neither parent could opt out of. Britta quoted the retainer figure. She said it the way you say a number you wish were smaller, clearly, without apology, without softening. Zara wrote it on the back of an envelope. She looked at her bank account on her phone. She looked at the number she had written. She put the phone face down on the counter and stood at the kitchen window watching a pigeon investigate the fire escape railing with the focused, unhurried energy of a creature that had never once received a legal filing. She envied it more than she expected to. The workplace piece arrived 3 days later. Zara worked as a program coordinator at a nonprofit on the West Side Arts Education, low-income youth, the kind of work that had kept her grounded through every hard year because it was the one room in her life where the value of what she was doing was never in question. On a Thursday afternoon, her supervisor Camille Oganyemi asked her to come into the office and closed the door with the particular care that told Zara before Camille said a word that this was not a routine conversation. An anonymous letter had been sent to HR. 2 pages. Detailed, organized, specific enough to carry the weight of something that looked like concern rather than malice to someone who didn't know what they were reading. It raised questions about Zara's emotional fitness, her reliability under pressure, her suitability specifically for work environments that involved regular contact with children. Camille said she did not believe it. She said this looking Zara directly in the eye, and Zara believed that she meant it. But HR has a protocol, Camille said. I can't override it. 2 weeks paid administrative leave while they work through the investigation. I'm sorry, Zara. I genuinely am. Zara said she understood. She said it with such composed evenness that Camille looked briefly uncertain, as if she'd expected a different reaction and wasn't sure if the one she was getting was healthy. Zara drove home in silence with both hands on the wheel and the radio off. She did the math in her head. Retainer. Evaluation fees. 2 weeks of administrative leave that technically paid but interrupted the freelance schedule she had been maintaining alongside her primary job to cover the gap the legal fees had already opened. The anonymous HR letter. The custody petition's allegations about her emotional fitness. The workplace complaint about her fitness to work around children. Each piece had arrived with enough breathing room between them to feel like separate problems. She understood now that they were one problem with multiple faces. Darius had always operated this way. He never came at a thing directly. He came at the things that thing depended on one at a time until the thing itself had nothing left to stand on. She had lived this before. She had just never understood the name for it while she was inside it. At the courthouse the following week, Darius arrived with 2 attorneys and the specific posture of a man who had attended enough institutional proceedings to be comfortable in them. He wore charcoal. He looked rested. In the marble hallway outside the courtroom, one of his lawyers said something that made him laugh. Genuine sounding, easy, the laugh of a man for whom this building and everything in it was familiar territory. He caught Zara looking. He held the eye contact for exactly 2 seconds. He did not smirk. He did not threaten. He turned back to his attorneys with the unhurried calm of a man who had already decided the outcome and was simply waiting for the paperwork to catch up. 2 seconds. That was all. And in those 2 seconds Zara felt, with the full weight of her own clarity, that she was losing. Not the hearing. Not yet. But the longer contest. The war of resources, of endurance, of who could sustain the pressure long enough that the other one made a choice they couldn't take back. She was getting worn down. And worn-down people made decisions from positions of depletion that they never would have made from positions of strength. She was thinking about it. That was the truth she had not yet said to a single person out loud. She was sitting quietly with the thought of withdrawing the custody challenge. Not because she agreed with a word of Darius's petition. Not because she believed she was unfit or unstable, or any of the language his filing had carefully assembled. But because there was a version of the math where continuing cost more than she had. Where survival meant strategic retreat. Where protecting Nico from the spectacle of a drawn-out fight mattered more than winning the fight. She was sitting with that thought in the courthouse hallway when Nico called that evening. It was a Wednesday, not a scheduled call day. Darius had apparently handed the phone over without explanation or comment, which was its own data point, though she didn't have the bandwidth to process it right then. Nico's voice on the line was careful in the way that 7-year-old voices should never have learned to be. He asked if she had eaten dinner. He asked if the apartment was doing okay, which was the question of a child who had been worrying about a place because it was the closest thing he had to asking if the person inside it was okay. He circled the real question twice before he finally landed on it, in the halting, imprecise, heartbreakingly sincere way of a child who wants to ask a precise thing but doesn't yet have the words. Mom, did I do something wrong? Is that why all the stuff keeps happening? Zara stopped moving. She was standing at the kitchen counter with a dish towel in her hands, and every single thing that had been held carefully in place by function and routine and the daily necessity of keeping herself operational. Every bit of it stopped. No, she said. Firm. Clear. No pause for processing. Not one thing you did. Not one thing. Do you hear me? She heard him exhale. A child's exhale. The specific sound of a weight releasing from somewhere that was never meant to be carrying it. When the call ended, she sat on the kitchen floor. She had done that 3 times since the petition arrived, and each time it had meant something different. The first time was shock. The second time was fear. This time was neither of those things. This time she let everything come through. The exhaustion and the fury and the grief of years and the love that was so large and so entirely unshielded that it registered in her body as physical pain. She let it come through her instead of holding it at the door. Took 11 minutes. She counted. Then she stood up, washed her face at the kitchen sink, and went to the closet. She took down Cashinvier's envelope. She spread the documents across the kitchen table under the good light. She read through every tab section slowly. The financial records, the communication logs, the time-stamped evidence trail connecting the anonymous HR letter, 2 prior complaints to Nico's school, and the custody petition itself to a single originating email address. 14 months of documented, coordinated pressure. All of it traceable. All of it preserved. She reached the last page. A small sticky note in even, unshowy handwriting. Court date moved up. Thursday, 9 a.m. You are not doing this alone. She read it twice. Then her phone lit up with a message from a number she did not have saved. No greeting. No context. For words, Darius wants a meeting. She set the phone face up on the table and looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at the documents. Then back at the phone. The question was not whether she was going to that meeting. The question was what version of herself was going to walk through that door. The documents spread across Zara's kitchen table told a story that no courtroom had ever heard, because no one had ever taken the time to write it down in the right order. She had been up since 4 in the morning. Not because she couldn't sleep, though that was also true, but because once she started reading through Cashinvier's folder with the deliberate attention it deserved, stopping felt like a betrayal of what she was holding. Each tab section opened into another, and each one was more precise than the last. Not dramatic, not assembled for effect. Just clean, time-stamped, sourced material that had been gathered with the patience of someone who understood that evidence is not about what you can say, it is about what you can prove. The first section covered financial records. Bank statements, wire transfers, business filing documents. All cross-referenced to show a pattern of financial control that had extended past the end of the relationship and into the co-parenting arrangement. Money that was supposed to cover Nico's medical costs had been routed through a holding account and delayed, repeatedly, in the weeks surrounding scheduled custody exchanges. Zara stared at those dates for a long time. She had filed 3 complaints about delayed support payments over the past 18 months. Each one had been dismissed as a clerical issue. Looking at the pattern now, side by side, the word clerical felt like an insult to the intelligence of everyone involved. The second section was communication logs. Every co-parenting message she had ever sent through the court-approved app alongside Darius's responses, and more importantly, alongside the messages he had sent from secondary accounts to her workplace, to her son's school, and to 2 community organizations she volunteered with. Anonymous messages, concern-framed, carefully worded to sound like a worried community member and not a man running a coordinated campaign to dismantle a woman's credibility from every institutional angle simultaneously. The third section was witness statements. 3 of them. Signed, dated, notarized. A former colleague of Darius's who had observed him falsifying a document during a lease negotiation. A neighbor from the building on Lenox Hill who had heard the arguments through the wall and had never been asked, until now, to put what she heard into writing. And a court mediator, now retired, who had flagged concerns about Darius's behavior during a mediation session 2 years prior, and been told by the presiding judge that the notation was outside the scope of the proceeding. 3 people. 3 separate accounts. 3 pieces of a picture that had always been there, fully formed, waiting for someone to stand still long enough to look at the whole thing at once. Cashin had not contacted her directly. There was no phone call, no email, no follow-up message asking how she was processing what she had received. Just the folder. Just the tabs. Just the evidence, organized with the kind of care that communicates, without a single word of explanation. That whoever assembled this understood exactly what it cost a person to go unbelieved for years, and had decided to do something about it in the only language that courtrooms actually spoke. At 6:15 in the morning, Zara's phone buzzed on the table beside the folder. It was Britta. "I just got a call from opposing counsel," Britta said, without greeting, in the voice she used when information required immediate processing. "The court date has been moved up, Thursday at 9. And Darius is requesting a private settlement conference before the hearing. His attorney is calling it an opportunity for resolution." Zara looked at the documents on her table. "Send me the details," she said. "Zara." Britta paused in the particular way that meant she was choosing her words. Private settlement conferences after this kind of filing are not usually about resolution. They're about leverage. He's going to walk in with something he wants and frame it as a reasonable compromise. "I need you to be clear on what you're walking in there prepared to give before you agree to sit across from him." "I know what I'm walking in prepared to give," Zara said. A long pause on Britta's end. "Okay," Britta said. "Then I'll send the details." After she hung up, Zara looked at the last page of the folder again. The sticky note in Cashin's handwriting. She turned it over. On the back, in the same even print, 3 words she hadn't noticed the first time she'd read it. "Don't settle. Win." She set it face down on the table. She poured herself a second cup of coffee. And for the first time since the petition had arrived, the feeling sitting in her chest was not dread. It was something considerably more dangerous than dread. It was readiness. Darius Beaumont had spent 14 months building a case out of her silence, her compliance, and her fear. What he did not know, what he could not have accounted for, because he had never once believed she was capable of it, was that she had stopped being silent. Thursday was 4 days away, and somewhere across the city, in a room she had not been invited into, Darius Beaumont was sitting with his attorneys, preparing for a meeting that he believed he had already won. He was going to walk into that room expecting the woman he used to know. He had no idea who was going to walk through that door. The conference room was on the 14th floor of a building in Midtown that had the specific, expensive quiet of a place where important decisions were made by people who had never once had to worry about affording them. Zara arrived 7 minutes early, not because her attorney told her to, though Britta had, but because she had decided sometime between 3 and 4 in the morning on the day of the meeting that she was going to be the first one in that room. She was going to be seated and settled and present before Darius Beaumont walked through the door, and she was never going to let him see her enter a room he was already occupying again. The view from the conference room window was all glass and steel, and a sky that had gone the particular flat gray of a February that hadn't decided yet if it was going to snow. Zara sat facing the door. Britta sat to her right with the folder open and a yellow legal pad beside it. On the table between them and the empty chairs across, Cashin's index documentation, organized into 3 clean stacks by section. Darius arrived 9 minutes late. Both his attorneys came in first, which was itself a statement, followed by Darius, who wore a dark blue suit and the specific expression of a man entering a room he intended to control. He saw the documents on the table before he saw anything else. His eyes moved over them once, briefly, with the practiced disinterest of a man who had learned not to show recognition. Then he sat. "Zara," he said. "Warm. Easy." The voice from the grocery aisle, the voice from 100 rooms before that. "I appreciate you agreeing to meet." She said nothing. She watched him. His lead attorney, a compact man named Weldon Pritchard who wore his confidence like an article of clothing, opened by framing the meeting as an opportunity for both parties to reach a resolution that prioritized Nico's well-being above the adversarial dynamic of continued litigation. He used the word well-being 4 times in 4 minutes. He referenced the psychological evaluation results, which were still pending, and noted that the current trajectory of the case was unlikely to benefit either parent's standing with the court. It was a good opening. Measured, reasonable sounding, assembled to make the listener feel like the reasonable thing to do was to agree before he got to the actual terms. Britta let him finish. Then she opened her own folder and slid a single page across the table. Weldon Pritchard picked it up. "Read it." Set it back down with the careful, neutral expression of a man who had just read something he needed a moment to process. Darius leaned forward and read it himself. His expression did not change in any way that a stranger would have caught. But Zara had spent 2 years learning to read him at the resolution that strangers could not access. She saw the exact moment the information landed. A stillness behind the eyes. A half-second where his jaw set in a way that wasn't quite casual. A recalibration, fast and quiet and almost invisible. Almost. The page contained a summary of the evidence in Cashin's folder. Not the full documentation, just the summary. A paragraph on the financial records, a paragraph on the communication logs, a paragraph on the 3 witness statements. Clean, factual, devastatingly organized. At the bottom, a notation that the full documentation had already been submitted to the court under seal, pending the Thursday hearing. Weldon Pritchard cleared his throat. "We'd want time to review any documentation before." "It's already been reviewed," Britta said. "By the court. That's what the notation means." The room went quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet when everyone present understands that the balance of something has shifted and nobody is ready to say it out loud yet. Darius looked at Zara for the first time since his opening pleasantry. Really looked. Not the 2-second courthouse hallway calculation. A full look, the way you look at a situation you thought you understood and have just discovered you didn't. "I think," Weldon Pritchard said carefully, "that we should take a short recess before." "He's going to withdraw the petition," Zara said. Everyone at the table looked at her, including Britta, who had not been told she was going to say that. "Excuse me," Weldon said. "The petition," Zara said. Her voice was level, not loud, not heated. The voice of a woman who was no longer performing calmness, who had arrived at it by a different route entirely. "He's going to withdraw it. And the evaluation request. And the complaint filed with my employer's HR department from the email account registered to his second address on file with the DMV. All of it." Darius had not looked away from her. She had expected to feel afraid when she got to this moment. She had rehearsed the fear, accounted for it, built her plan around the assumption that it would be present and she would have to manage it. It was not present. What was present was something much quieter and much more total. The complete absence of the need for his approval, his understanding, his concession, or his acknowledgement of what he had done. She did not need him to admit it. She did not need him to apologize. She did not need the satisfaction of watching him realize she had won. She just needed him to leave. "No," she said, before Weldon Pritchard could start the reframe. "We're not taking a recess. And we're not negotiating the terms. He has 48 hours to file the withdrawal, or the full documentation package goes to the DA's office for review of the perjury exposure in the original petition." Darius Beaumont sat across from her in a 14-floor conference room in Midtown, in his dark blue suit, with 2 attorneys and 2 years of calculated pressure and 14 months of coordinated institutional harassment behind him. And for the first time in the entire length of their shared history, he had nothing to say. He picked up his jacket from the back of his chair. He stood. He buttoned the jacket with the same controlled, unhurried movements he always used when he needed the room to believe nothing had rattled him. He walked to the door. He did not look back. And Zara Osei sat in that conference room on the 14th floor and did not feel triumph. Did not feel relief. Did not feel the rush of a victory she had earned at enormous cost. She felt, for the first time in 3 years, like the floor under her feet was solid. Britta was writing something on her legal pad. She stopped writing. She looked at Zara. "You want to tell me when you decided to do that?" Britta said. Zara picked up her coffee cup. It was cold. "4 in the morning," she said. Britta nodded slowly. "That tracks." The elevator down the hall made its soft mechanical sound. Darius was in it. Going down. And the Thursday hearing was still 4 days away, and nothing had been signed, and Weldon Pritchard was still in his seat across the table looking at the summary page with the expression of a man doing arithmetic he didn't like the outcome of. But something had happened in that room that no document could fully capture. Something had ended, and something had begun, and Zara was the only person in that building who understood exactly what both of those things were. The courtroom on Thursday had the low, working hum of a place that processed other people's worst days with the brisk efficiency of an institution that had seen too many of them to slow down for any single one. Judge Celestine Owusu had been on the family court bench for 11 years. She was not a theatrical judge. She did not editorialize, did not perform wisdom, did not grant the dramatic pauses that courtroom scenes in movies relied on for emotional effect. She read. She listened. She asked precise questions. And she had a specific, documented reputation for being entirely unimpressed by legal strategy that prioritized the appearance of parental concern over its actual practice. Zara sat at the left table with Britta and the full documentation package. She wore a dark green blazer over a white shirt. Tamika had picked it out the night before and brought it over along with a container of jollof rice and the very specific energy of an older sister who was not going to say everything she was feeling but was going to make sure you were fed before you walked into a courtroom. Zara had eaten the rice. She had slept 4 hours. She was as ready as she was going to be. Darius's table, to the right, had only Weldon Pritchard. No second attorney. Zara noticed that immediately and filed it without looking at it directly, the way you file information you don't want to appear to be tracking. The hearing opened with procedural items. Judge Owusu reviewed the petition, the response, the submitted documentation, and the psychological evaluation preliminary findings, which had come back after the evaluator reviewed the full communication logs, with a notation that the originating complaint appeared to reflect a pattern inconsistent with genuine welfare concern. The evaluator's language was clinical. The meaning was not. Weldon Pritchard stood to present. He was good. Zara gave him that. He reframed the petition's language, distanced it from the communication log evidence by arguing admissibility, and made a competent case for why the custody arrangement should at minimum be reviewed by the court going forward. He spoke for 12 minutes. When he sat down, he pulled a single sheet from his folder and slid it across the table toward Britta without looking at her. Britta read it. She passed it to Zara without a word. It was a partial withdrawal. Not the full withdrawal Zara had demanded in the conference room. Darius was conceding the psychological evaluation request and 2 of the 3 complaint allegations. He was maintaining the request for a custody review, framed now not as an emergency but as a standard periodic review, and proposing a modified shared custody arrangement. Modified shared custody. Not full custody. Not the supervised visitation that the documentation warranted. A compromise, offered at the last possible moment, constructed to look like good faith while preserving as much of his access and leverage as the evidence would still allow. Zara read it once, passed it back. Britta stood. She presented the full documentation package methodically, section by section, without drama, without editorializing. She let the financial records speak to the pattern of withheld support payments. She let the communication logs speak to the coordinated nature of the anonymous complaints. She let the 3 witness statements speak to the behavior that had never made it into any prior court record because nobody had ever asked the right people the right questions until now. The courtroom was quiet in the way that courtrooms go quiet when the evidence is not performing, when it is simply landing. Judge Owusu-Hart asked 2 questions. Both were directed at Weldon Pritchard. The first was about the email account connected to the employer HR complaint. The second was about the mediator's 2-year-old flag notation that had been dismissed outside the scope of a prior proceeding. Weldon Pritchard answered both questions carefully. Judge Owusu-Hart made a note. She looked at both tables for a moment. Then she looked at neither of them, which was somehow the most significant look in the room. She ruled from the bench. Full physical custody to Zara Osei, effective immediately. Darius Beaumont to have scheduled visitation with a third-party coordinator present at all exchanges for a period of no less than 12 months, at which point the arrangement would be reviewed based on compliance. The psychological evaluation notation to be entered into the permanent court record. The petition and all related complaints to be documented in the case file as part of the established pattern of litigation. She did not say the word harassment. She did not need to. Every word she said was built around the shape of it. Weldon Pritchard gathered his papers with the compact, practiced efficiency of a man who had lost cleanly and intended to exit accordingly. Darius was not in the room. He had not come to the hearing. Zara had not noticed his absence when she walked in. She noticed it now, and what struck her was not the absence itself but her own reaction to it, which was nothing. No relief. No additional satisfaction. No loosening of tension at his non-appearance. He was irrelevant to the outcome now in a way he had never been irrelevant to anything in the years she had known him, and that irrelevance was its own kind of conclusion. Britta was packing her bag. She glanced at Zara over the top of it. Full custody, she said. Coordinated exchanges. Pattern documented permanently. She paused. That's about as complete as it gets. Zara nodded. But that's not the real ending, Britta said. She wasn't asking. She was observing. Zara looked at the bench where Judge Owusu-Hart had already moved on to the next case, already reading the next file, already fully present in the next family's worst day. No, she said. It's not. Because Britta had called that morning, before the hearing, about a second thing. A separate legal path that had opened up now that the documentation was in the court record and the pattern was established and the DA's office had, quietly, been made aware that the materials existed. Perjury charge. Viable. Documentable. Very likely to succeed. And Zara had 24 hours to decide if she wanted to pursue it. The DA's office had sent the preliminary papers at 9:47 in the morning. Zara knew this because she had been sitting at the kitchen table since 9, waiting for them, and her phone had buzzed and she had looked at it and then set it face down on the table and hadn't picked it up again for 20 minutes. This was not avoidance. This was the specific, deliberate pause of a person who understood that once she opened something, she was going to have to decide about it. And she needed to be entirely clear before she decided. The perjury charge was viable. Britta had confirmed it 3 times using 3 different framings, each one more specific than the last, because Britta knew that Zara was the kind of person who needed to understand a thing from every angle before she moved. The documentation in the court record established that Darius had knowingly submitted false allegations in the emergency petition. The psychological evaluation notation confirmed the complaint pattern was manufactured. The email account connection tied the anonymous HR letter directly to him. Combined with the 3 witness statements and the financial records, the DA's office believed they had what they needed to move forward if Zara authorized it. She could do it. That was not the question. The question was whether she was going to. She picked up her coffee and walked to the window. Outside, the block was doing what it did on a late weekday morning. The dry cleaner's door propped open, 2 kids in school uniforms arguing about something with the full-body intensity that only children and people with nothing to lose could sustain. A delivery driver double-parked and entirely unbothered about it. The ordinary machinery of a neighborhood that did not know or care what was sitting on Zara Osei's kitchen table. She thought about the years, not the whole span of them. She had done that enough in therapy and in courtrooms and in her sister's living room at midnight. She thought about specific moments. The apartment on Lenox Hill. The $40 allowance. The mediator's flagged notation that had been dismissed. The way Nico had learned to go quiet when certain energies entered a room. The petition and its manufactured language. The anonymous letter that had gone to her employer. The grocery aisle. The hand. She thought about all of it. And then she set it down. Not the way you set something down when you're done being angry. She had not arrived at done. She set it down the way you set a heavy bag down after a long walk. Not because the bag wasn't real. Not because what was in it didn't matter. But because carrying it any further was only going to cost her weight she could not get back. She thought about Nico. Not what Nico would think about her choice. He was 7, and 7-year-olds were not the audience for this decision. She thought about who she wanted Nico to watch her become over the next 10 years. She thought about the version of herself she was building, one choice at a time, in the presence of a child who was taking notes whether he understood it or not. She thought about what it would cost to pursue the charge. Not financially, though that was real. She thought about the time it would take. The hearings. The depositions. The depositions about the depositions. The years of continued engagement with a person she had spent everything she had to finally stop being controlled by. The requirement, in order to win that charge, of remaining tethered to his story for however long it took the system to process it. She thought about Cashin's folder on her kitchen table. 3 tabs. 14 months of documented harm. The sticky note that said don't settle, win. She had won. Not by his rules. Not the way he would have won, which would have required her complete destruction. She had won the thing that actually mattered, which was the safety and stability of the life she and Nico were going to build without him in it. She picked up her phone. She opened the email from Britta. She read the preliminary papers fully one time without rushing. Then she typed her response. 2 sentences. Clear, final, no footnotes. She declined to press charges. She set the phone on the counter. She poured the rest of her coffee down the sink because it had gone cold. She stood at the kitchen window for a moment looking at the block, at the kids who had apparently resolved their argument and were now sharing a bag of chips with the easy solidarity of children who could not sustain a grudge for more than 4 minutes. She smiled, quietly, to no one. And then she went to get Nico from school. 6 months later, Nico Osei started sleeping with both arms spread wide across his mattress, taking up all the space a 7-year-old body could occupy, which is considerably more space than you'd expect. Zara noticed this the first night it happened. Walked past his door on her way to bed and saw him sprawled there, completely open, completely unguarded, in the specific abandon of a child who is not, even in sleep, braced for anything. She stood in the doorway for a moment. She didn't say anything. She pulled the door almost closed and went to bed and lay there in the dark for a little while, not thinking about anything in particular, just being in the fact of it. The apartment had changed in ways she hadn't consciously planned. Nico's drawings covered the refrigerator now. Not neatly, not arranged, just layered and overlapping and entirely his, with occasional editorial notes written in marker that said things like "This is a dinosaur in space. Do not question it." His shoes were always in the wrong place. The living room had a basketball hoop on the back of the closet door that had been there for 3 months and had already taken out 1 picture frame and a houseplant. And Zara had replaced neither because she was not entirely sure she wanted to. She went back to her morning workout class. She went back to her job. HR had closed the investigation 6 weeks after it opened, with a formal notation in the file that the anonymous complaint had been determined to be externally motivated and entirely without basis. Camille had called personally. She had said she was sorry twice and then said it a third time, and Zara had let her, because some apologies needed the space to be said more than once before they landed right. The custody arrangement held. Darius complied with the structured exchange schedule with the same clean, documented precision he had used in those 23 days before the petition, except now that precision was not a strategy. It was a requirement, monitored, recorded, with a third-party coordinator at every handoff who was not impressed by charm and was not there to be managed. Nico did not ask again if he had done something wrong. He asked other things. He asked why dinosaurs didn't have wings if birds came from dinosaurs, and whether space was actually black or just looked black, and whether it was possible to be best friends with someone who was also annoying. Zara answered all of these to the best of her ability and admitted uncertainty where she had it, which Nico received with the pragmatic acceptance of a child who had decided his mother was trustworthy enough to be honest with. It was a Saturday morning in early October when she saw Cashin Vire again. She was at the farmer's market on Lenox. Nico was 3 stalls ahead of her, locked in serious deliberation over which apple to choose, treating the decision with the gravity it deserved, and she almost walked past him. He was standing at a coffee cart with a paper cup, reading something on his phone, dressed in a plain gray shirt with the sleeves pushed up, looking like a person who was simply at a farmer's market on a Saturday and not the person who had handed her, without explanation or expectation, the tools she had needed to save her own life. She stopped. He looked up. Not startled, she got the impression very little startled him. He looked at her, and something in his face moved in the quiet way things moved on his face, and he nodded. A single nod. The nod of a person who is glad to see that something turned out the way it should have. "Hey," he said. "Hey," she said. That was the whole greeting. It was enough. Nico appeared at her side with an apple in each hand, requiring an immediate second opinion. She gave it. He accepted it. He looked at Cashin with the frank, unfiltered assessment of a 7-year-old who had no social filter and no particular reason to acquire one. "Are you my mom's friend?" Nico asked. Cashin looked at Zara. Question, not a statement. "Yeah," Zara said. "He is." Cashin smiled. It was a real one. She could tell the difference now, had learned to read the difference in the months when she had been rebuilding her ability to trust what she saw. He did not try to shake Nico's hand or make a show of the introduction. He just acknowledged it the way you acknowledge a thing that is true and does not require elaboration. They stood at the coffee cart for a few minutes, talked about nothing significant, the market, the weather that had finally decided it was fall, Nico's ongoing inquiry into the aerodynamics of apples. Cashin did not mention the folder, did not reference the courtroom, did not ask how the case had resolved or whether she had pressed the perjury charge or any of the things that would have required her to locate herself inside that chapter of her life in order to answer. He just drank his coffee. Let the morning be a morning. When they said goodbye, Nico already moving toward the next stall, apple chosen, mission complete. Cashin looked at her one last time with the same direct, no performance quality he'd had in the grocery aisle. No unfinished sentences. No invitation or implication. Just a man looking at a woman he respected, in the clean and uncomplicated way of someone who had never needed anything from her in return for what he had done. She walked away into the market, Nico's hand in hers, the October sun doing its specific low-angle fall thing that makes every surface look like it was worth something. People asked her sometimes. Her sister, colleagues, the women in her morning workout class who had watched her go through it without knowing all of what they were watching, whether she was afraid, raising Nico alone, fighting the system alone, starting over alone. She always told them the truth. She said, "I already raised one alpha. I know exactly what that costs and exactly what it takes and exactly what it leaves behind when it's done." This time, she was raising a boy who would grow up watching a woman hold a line. A boy who would grow up understanding that love did not look like a hand on a throat. A boy who spread his arms wide in his sleep because no part of him was waiting for impact. Some victories don't come with a ceremony. Some of the most important things that happen in a life happen in a farmer's market on a Saturday morning, or on a kitchen floor at midnight, or in the 11 minutes it takes to let everything through so you can stand up again. Strength is not the absence of fear. It is the decision you make while the fear is still in the room. And the most dangerous thing Zara Osei ever did was not the courtroom, not the conference room, not the 14th-floor building in Midtown with its expensive quiet and its city view. The most dangerous thing she ever did was refuse to become what 2 years of pressure had tried to make her. She did it quietly, without an audience, without credit, and it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. If the story moved you, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications, because every week on this channel we bring you real stories of strength, survival, and the kind of quiet power that never makes the headlines but changes lives completely. Don't miss a single one. And if you know someone who needs to hear a story like Zara's today, share this. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us what moment hit you hardest. Tell us what you would have done. Your words in that comment section are not just reactions. They are someone else's reminder that they are not alone. We will see you in the next story.